for 7 years. My family called me their charity case. They made sure I felt the weight of every dinner invitation and every pitying glance, convincing me I was lucky just to be tolerated. I believed them, right up until the moment my grandmother's lawyer opened her will. It turns out, while I was counting pennies to pay for my mistakes, my family had been counting on my silence to hide theirs. My life existed in two distinct realities. In the first reality, the one documented on the spreadsheets I kept meticulously updated every Sunday night, I was 33 years old, employed as a senior operations coordinator at North Pine Mutual Services, and the sole tenant of a clean, sun-drenched duplex on the quiet side of town. In this reality, I was solvent. My credit score had climbed back from the wreckage of my divorce, point by agonizing point. I paid my bills 3 days early. I had a savings account that no longer hovered in the double digits. I was boring, steady, and entirely self-sufficient. In the second reality, the one occupied by every other member of the Griffin family, I was a walking tragedy. I was the charity case. I was the cautionary tale they whispered about over chilled white wine and spinach dip. To them, my divorce 7 years ago had not been a legal dissolution of a marriage, but a total collapse of my competence as a human being. They viewed my quiet life in Briar Glen not as a recovery, but as a retreat. They looked at my rented duplex and saw failure. Despite the fact that I preferred calling a landlord to fix a leaking pipe rather than draining a maintenance fund I did not have. For 7 years, I had allowed these two realities to coexist because it was easier than fighting a war I could not win. I let them pay for lunch when we met, nodding when they sighed and said to put my wallet away because they knew things were tight. I let them hand me bags of secondhand clothes I did not need, thanking them for their generosity while I donated the items to the shelter the next day. I absorbed their pity because it was the price of admission to the family, but the price was getting higher. It was a Tuesday in late October when the invitation to my cousin Sarah's engagement party arrived. It was heavy cardstock, cream with gold foil lettering, demanding my presence at the Briar Glen Country Club. I stared at it on my kitchen counter. Feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, I knew exactly how the evening would go. I would put on the one expensive dress I had saved from my former life. I would drive my practical sedan to the valet stand, and I would spend 4 hours smiling until my jaw ached while dodging questions about why I was still single or if I needed help finding a second job. I went anyway. I went because Grandma Margot would be there, and lately, she was the only reason I walked into rooms filled with griffins. The country club was decorated in aggressively tasteful autumnal tones. Pumpkins that had been painted gold sat on every surface, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and wood smoke. I navigated the crowd, clutching a glass of sparkling water like a shield. I spotted my mother, Darlene, holding court near the fireplace, her laugh ringing out a little too loudly. She was wearing a new structural jacket that probably cost more than my car payment. I steered clear of her orbit, moving toward the buffet table where I hoped to look busy. That was when I heard it. I was standing behind a large floral arrangement, hidden from the main seating area by a wall of hydrangeas. When Aunt Lydia's voice drifted over the petals, Lydia was my mother's sister, a woman who treated gossip like a competitive sport. I told the caterer to cut the head count by 2 just to be safe, Lydia was saying. I froze. I knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she was about to say something she considered terribly clever. But don't worry about Ariana. She won't bring a +1. She can't afford one. There was a pause, a beat of silence where a kinder family might have corrected her, or at least changed the subject. Instead, a ripple of laughter moved through the group. It wasn't malicious laughter. Exactly. It was worse. It was comfortable. It was the sound of people confirming a known fact. It was the sound of a group agreeing on the sky being blue or the grass being green. Ariana is the poor one. Ariana is the broken one. I stood there, my hand gripping the cold glass, feeling the heat climb up my neck. It was not the insult that hurt. It was the casualness of it. They did not even need to lower their voices because they did not fear my reaction. What could I do? I was the charity case. Charity cases were supposed to be grateful, not proud. I waited until the laughter died down before I stepped out from behind the flowers. I did not make eye contact with Lydia. I did not storm over and tell them that I had just received a promotion or that my bank account was healthier than it had been in a decade. I just walked to the bar, set my full glass down, and walked out the side door into the crisp Vermont air. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, breathing in the smell of cold upholstery, telling myself that it did not matter. I told myself I was free in ways they were not. But as I drove home, passing the large, lit-up houses of my relatives, I felt small. They had defined me, and no matter what I did, the label stuck. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. I glanced over at it. A text from Evan. My younger brother was the golden boy of the family, a title he maintained despite a career path that could best be described as theoretical. He was 29, charming, and perpetually waiting for his big break in architectural photography. Hey Ari, the text read, super weird ask, but I am in a jam. Rent gap. Can you float me $300? Pay you back Friday. Promise. I stared at the screen. $300. I had it. It was in my account right now. I could transfer it in 30 seconds. The old instinct flared up. The desire to be useful. The desire to prove that I was not the destitute disaster they thought I was. If I sent the money, I was the big sister. I was capable. I opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. Then, on a hunch, I closed the banking app and opened Instagram. Evan's story was the first bubble at the top of my feed. I tapped it. The photo had been posted 14 minutes ago. It was a close-up of a pair of vintage leather boots, beautifully lit, resting on a polished floorboards. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to invest in the art." New kicks for the portfolio shoot. I stared at the boots. They were easily $400, maybe $5. He had bought the boots, and now, 14 minutes later, he was asking me to cover his rent gap. He didn't ask me because he thought I had money. He asked me because he knew I was desperate for connection. He knew I would scrape the bottom of my barrel to feel like I was helping. He was leveraging my pathetic reputation to subsidize his lifestyle. My hands shook as I typed the reply. I can't do it this month. Evan, sorry. I hit send before I could change my mind. I waited for the 3 dots to appear, for him to say it was okay, for him to understand. K. He replied, "No worries." That was it. No question about how I was doing, no apology for asking, just a dismissal. I tossed the phone onto the couch and went into my small kitchen. I made tea, but I didn't drink it. I stood over the sink and hated myself. I hated that I had said no, and I hated that saying no made me feel like I was failing him, even when I knew he was using me. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in my stomach that sat there all night. The next morning, the assault continued. I was at my desk at North Pine, organizing a compliance audit. When my cell phone rang, it was my mother. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately felt the panic of avoidance, so I called her back. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice bright. "Everything okay?" "Oh, everything is fine, sweetheart," Darlene said. Her voice had that specific cadence she used when she thought she was being benevolent. It was soft, airy, and laced with judgment. "I was just going over some accounts with your father, and we had a thought." I braced myself. "What kind of thought?" "Well, we know how hard it is for you right now," she said. "With the holidays coming up and everything. Inflation is just terrible, isn't it? We were thinking of adding you as an authorized user on the Family American Express, just for emergencies. You could keep the card in your wallet, and if something happens, a flat tire, a medical bill, you wouldn't have to panic." It sounded kind. To anyone listening from the outside, it would sound like a mother looking out for her struggling daughter. But I knew the code. The family card wasn't about safety. It was about surveillance. If I was on the card, Darlene would see every transaction. She would know if I bought coffee. She would know if I went to the movies. She would have a line-item veto power over my life. It was a way to drag me back under the microscope, to confirm that I was still the child who couldn't manage her own affairs. "That is really generous, Mom," I said, staring at my dual monitors, at the spreadsheets where I managed budgets in the millions for my company. "But I am okay. I have my own emergency fund set up." "An emergency fund," she repeated. The skepticism dripped from the phone. "Ariana, be realistic. How much could you possibly have put away? We just want to help you sleep at night." "I sleep fine," I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. "I really don't need it, but thank you." "Fine," Darlene sighed. It was a sigh that communicated martyrdom. "I just hate thinking of you one flat tire away from ruin, but if you want to be stubborn, that is your choice." She hung up before I could say goodbye. I sat in my cubicle, trembling with a rage I couldn't express. One flat tire away from ruin. That was the narrative. They needed it to be true. If I was ruining my life, then their lives looked perfect by comparison. 2 days later, I went to see Grandma Margot. She lived at Renfield Assisted Living, a place that smelled of lavender cleaning spray and oatmeal. Margot Griffin was 84 years old, and unlike the rest of the family, she had never looked at me with pity. She looked at me with a terrifying kind of clarity. When I walked into her room, she was sitting in her armchair by the window, a stack of file folders on her lap. She looked frail. Her skin was like parchment paper, translucent and thin, but her eyes were sharp, bright blue and unblinking. "Close the door," she said. No hello, no pleasantries. I closed it. "Hi, Grandma. How are you feeling?" "Like I am dying," she said matter-of-factly. "Sit down. I need you to write something down for me." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Okay, what do you need? A grocery list?" "Don't be dense. Ariana, it does not suit you." She tapped a manicured finger on the folder. "I need a list of your current debts, exact figures. I also need to see a copy of your lease agreement, and I want to know who is listed as the beneficiary on your work-life insurance policy." I blinked. "Grandma, why? That is a lot of personal information." "It is practical information," she snapped. "Do you have debt?" "A little," I lied. "Nothing I can't handle." "Don't lie to me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a steel core. "I want to know exactly what hangs over your head. Write it down, now." There was no arguing with Margot when she was in this mood. I pulled a notebook from my bag. I wrote down the balance of the one credit card I was still paying off, the one that had absorbed the moving costs when I left my ex-husband. It was down to $600. I wrote down my car payment. I wrote down my rent. I handed her the paper. She put on her reading glasses and studied it for a long time. The silence stretched out, filled only by the hum of the heater. "Better than I thought," she murmured. She looked up at me. "You are paying this card off aggressively, more than the minimum." "I want it gone," I said defensively. "Good." She handed the paper back. "Keep doing that. And the beneficiary?" "It is Mom," I said. "I set it up when I started the job 4 years ago. I haven't changed it." "Change it," Margot said. "Change it tomorrow. Make it a charity. Make it a stranger. I don't care. Just take Darlene off." "Grandma, that is morbid. And Mom would be—" "Your mother," Margot cut in, "likes to control things she fears, and she fears everything." Margot leaned back in her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. The energy that had sustained her interrogation was fading. "You listen to me, Ariana. People call you a charity case not because they care about you. They call you a charity case because it helps them sleep at night. If you are the disaster, then they are the success. You are the yardstick they measure themselves against. Do not give them the satisfaction of being right." I sat there, stunned. "I try not to," I whispered. "Try harder," she said, closing her eyes. "Now go. I am tired." I left Renfield with my head spinning. I had never heard anyone in the family acknowledge the dynamic so openly. It felt like she had handed me a key, but I didn't know which door it opened. The following Friday, I achieved my victory. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open. I navigated to the credit card portal. The balance was $542. I had saved enough from my last 2 paychecks to cover it entirely. With enough left over for groceries, I clicked Make Payment. I selected Full Balance. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. Current balance, 0. I stared at the number. It was just a number, but it felt like oxygen. For the first time in 7 years, I owed nothing to anyone. I was free. The debt from the divorce, the debt that had been the subject of so many family whispers, was gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call someone, but who? Darlene would ask where I got the money. Evan would probably ask for a loan. I decided to celebrate alone. I ordered takeout from the good Thai place across town. Pad Thai with extra peanuts and expensive spring rolls. When it arrived, I plated it on my nice dishes. I poured a glass of wine. I took a picture of the setup, the steaming food, the zero-balance screen in the background, the cozy light of my living room. I opened social media. I uploaded the photo. I typed a caption. Finally debt-free. Feels good to breathe. My thumb hovered over the post button. I imagined Aunt Lydia seeing it. Oh, look, Ariana is bragging about paying off a bill. Most people just pay their bills without a parade. I imagined Darlene, if she has money for Thai food, why did she need to be on the family card? She is being irresponsible again. I imagined Evan. Must be nice. The joy evaporated. The pride turned into ash in my mouth. I deleted the draft. I put my phone face down on the table. I ate my expensive pad thai in silence, feeling the familiar walls of my role closing in. I wasn't allowed to win. Winners didn't need charity. The call came 3 nights later. It was 2:00 in the morning. The ringtone shattered the silence of the duplex. Sounding like a fire alarm in the dark, I fumbled for the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Ariana Griffin?" a voice asked. It was professional, kind, and terrifying. "Yes? This is the night nurse at Renfield. We have called your parents, but your grandmother asked us to call you specifically. She has taken a significant turn. We are moving her to Lakeshore Haven Hospice House immediately. You should come." The world tilted. I was out of bed before the sentence was finished. "I am on my way." The drive to Lakeshore Haven was a blur of darkness and high beams. It was raining, a cold, sleeting rain that turned the winding Vermont roads into mirrors. I drove fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Regret washed over me. I shouldn't have left so quickly the other day. I should have asked her what she meant. I should have stayed until she fell asleep. I thought I had more time. We always think we have more time. Lakeshore Haven was quiet. A low building nestled in the pines near the water. The silence inside was heavy, insulated by carpets and acoustic tiles. The nurse at the station pointed me to room 4. "She is in and out," the nurse said softly, "but she is asking for you." I walked into the room. It was dimly lit. My parents weren't there yet. They lived 40 minutes away. While I was only 20, it was just me and Margot. She looked small in the bed. The formidable woman who had terrified my cousins and commanded boardrooms in her youth was gone. In her place was a bundle of bones and shallow breathing. I pulled a chair to the bedside and took her hand. It was cold. "Grandma, I am here." Her eyelids fluttered. It took a supreme effort for her to focus. But when she did, the blue eyes were still there, hazy but present. "Ariana," she rasped. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I am here, Grandma. Listen to me." She squeezed my hand. A surprisingly strong grip for someone so close to the end. "I am sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. "Grandma, you don't have to apologize. You have been the only one who was nice to me." "No," she wheezed. "Not for that. I am sorry for what you were made to carry." She took a rattling breath. "After the divorce, I saw it. I didn't stop it." "It's okay," I soothed, stroking her hand. "It's over." "It is not over," she whispered fiercely. She tried to lift her head but failed. Promise me something, right now. Anything. When I am gone, the family, they will come with papers. She coughed. A wet, painful sound. They will try to make it easy. They will say it is for the best. Do not sign. I stared at her. Do not sign what? Anything, she hissed. No matter how emotional it gets, no matter what they say. Do not sign anything until you read every word. Promise me. I promise, I said, my voice shaking. I won't sign. She relaxed then, sinking back into the pillows. Good girl. You are stronger than they think. Her eyes drifted closed. Her breathing slowed, the rhythm stretching out longer and longer. My parents arrived 10 minutes later. Darlene swept in, smelling of night cream and panic, followed by my father. Marshall, who looked annoyed to be awake, they bustled around the bed, touching Margot's face, asking the nurses questions, filling the room with noise. I stood in the corner, invisible again. I watched them perform their grief. I watched Darlene cry and talk about how she hoped her mother knew how much she was loved. Margot never woke up again. She died 2 days later, quietly, in the early hours of the morning while the sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the pine trees. I was there when it happened. I had taken the night shift so my parents could go home and sleep. I watched the rise and fall of her chest stop. I waited for the next breath. But it never came. The stillness that followed was absolute. I walked out of the hospice center an hour later, after the doctor had come and the calls had been made. The morning air was biting cold. I stood in the parking lot, staring at my hands. They looked just like they had yesterday, but the world had shifted on its axis. I felt a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I wasn't just grieving my grandmother. I was grieving the witness. Margot was the only person who had seen me. Not the charity case, not the failure, but me. She was the only one who knew the truth of who I was. Now she was gone, and I was left alone with the wolves. I got into my car, turned the key, and sat there as the engine idled. I remembered her grip on my hand. Do not sign. I put the car in gear and drove toward the sunrise, terrified of what was coming next. The days between my grandmother's death and her funeral were not measured in hours, but in a series of rapidly expanding logistical headaches. To my family, grief was not an internal process of mourning a matriarch. It was a public relations event that required precise management. The Griffin family did not just attend a funeral. We staged one. Darlene, my mother, appointed herself the director of this production. She set up a command center in the living room of the sprawling Victorian house my parents were renting for the week, a few miles from my duplex. The air in that house was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee, while my aunts and uncles debated the merits of catered salmon versus roast beef. I was assigned the tasks that were deemed essential but invisible. I was the folder of programs. I was the fetcher of water. I was the runner of errands that required standing in line at the print shop or the florist. It was a role I knew well. I was useful enough to be employed, but not important enough to be consulted. Make sure the edges are crisp, Ariana, Darlene told me, hovering over the dining table where I sat with a stack of heavy cream paper. Margot hated sloppy work. I am creasing them with a bone folder, Mom, I said, keeping my eyes on the paper. They are perfect. We just want everything to be nice, she said, her voice trailing off as she turned her attention to my cousin Sarah. Sarah, darling, did you decide which earrings you are wearing for the eulogy? The pearls would look lovely with your neckline. I pressed the bone folder down hard on the paper, flattening the spine until it was razor sharp. Sarah, who had visited Grandma Margot exactly twice in the last 3 years, was giving a reading. I, who had driven her to doctor's appointments and sat with her through chemo scares and listened to her stories about the war, was folding paper. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the energy to fight it. I told myself that my grief was private. something I carried in my chest like a stone. While theirs was a performance that would end as soon as the black cars drove away, the funeral service was held at the historic stone chapel on the edge of town, followed by a reception at Cedar and Slate Hall. The hall was beautiful, with high timber beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray, choppy water of the lake. It was exactly the kind of venue the Griffins loved: expensive, understated, and impeccably lit. I stood near the buffet table, nursing a glass of iced tea. I had spent the last hour accepting condolences from people who looked over my shoulder as they spoke to me, their eyes scanning the room for someone more important. "So sorry for your loss. Ariana, is your father around?" "Thinking of you, dear." "Oh, look, there is Darlene." I was a waypoint, a pause in the conversation before the main event. I turned to refill my glass and found myself standing on the other side of a decorative fern, just out of sight of a high-top table occupied by 3 of my cousins. They were leaning in, their voices pitched to that specific volume that implies privacy but invites eavesdropping. "It is a lovely service," my cousin Rebecca said. She was swirling a glass of Pinot Grigio. "Aunt Darlene really pulled it together." "She had to," a male voice replied. I recognized it as Jason, Rebecca's husband. "The estate is going to be a nightmare to untangle. You know how Margot was with paperwork." "Well, at least Ariana will get something," Rebecca said. Her tone wasn't kind. It was practical, bordering on dismissive. "She needs it. Honestly, it is probably for the best that Margot passed before she spent everything on care. Ariana can finally pay off whatever mess she is in and stop looking so desperate." I froze. My hand gripped the pitcher of iced tea so hard my fingers ached. "She does look tired," Jason agreed. "But you know Darlene will make sure it is managed. They are not going to just cut her a check and let her blow it." "Thank God for that," Rebecca laughed softly. "Can you imagine? It would be gone in a year." I set the pitcher down. I didn't pour the drink. I walked away, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. The sound seemed deafening to me, but no one looked up. They were too busy discussing my financial incompetence as if it were a weather pattern, something inevitable and unfortunate. I needed air. I headed for the double doors leading to the patio, but before I could reach the exit, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. "Ariana," I turned. It was my father, Marshall. He was wearing a black suit that looked expensive, but fit him poorly around the shoulders, as if he were shrinking inside it. His face was flushed, likely from the open bar. "Dad," I said, "I was just going to get some air." "In a minute," he said. He steered me away from the door and into a quiet alcove near the coat check. It was a maneuver that felt practiced. He blocked my exit with his body, creating a small, claustrophobic intimacy. "How are you holding up?" he asked. It was the standard question, but his eyes weren't looking at me with concern. They were scanning my face for cracks. "I am fine," I said. "It is a lot of people." "It is a tribute," he corrected. "Your grandmother was a respected woman. We need to honor that." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. "We need to show a united front. Ariana, families are fragile things, especially when money gets involved." I stiffened. "I haven't asked for money, Dad." I know," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "But things are going to happen fast now. There are processes, legalities." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of scotch. "You are not going to make things complicated with the estate, right?" "Complicated?" I repeated. "I don't even know what is in the estate. How could I make it complicated?" "By asking questions that don't need to be asked," he said. His voice dropped, losing the veneer of fatherly advice. "Your mother and I have been handling Margot's affairs for a long time. We know what she wanted. We have a plan to make sure everyone is taken care of, including you, especially you. But it only works if we all row in the same direction." "Row in the same direction," I echoed. It was a corporate phrase, a management phrase. Does that mean I just do what I'm told? Marshall's jaw tightened. It means you trust your family to look out for you. Instead of acting like a victim, don't cause a scene. Ari, not this week. He patted my shoulder, 2 hard, perfunctory taps, and walked away before I could respond. I stood there, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. Don't cause a scene. That was the Griffin family motto. You could bleed to death as long as you didn't stain the carpet. I pushed through the doors to the patio. The cold wind off the lake hit me, stinging my eyes. I walked to the stone railing and looked out at the water, trying to steady my breathing. Rough in there? I jumped. Evan was leaning against the stone wall a few feet away, smoking a vape pen. He looked handsome in his suit, the picture of the grieving grandson, but his eyes were shifting nervously. It is a shark tank, I said. Dad just cornered me. Evan exhaled a cloud of strawberry-scented vapor. Yeah, he is stressed. Mom is riding him pretty hard about the logistics. He told me not to make things complicated, I said, looking at my brother. What does that mean, Evan? What are they worried I'm going to do? Evan shrugged, but he didn't meet my gaze. He looked at his shoes. They just want to make sure you are okay. Ari, you know how they get. They worry about your stability. My stability, I said flatly. I have held the same job for 4 years. I pay my own rent. Why is my stability the topic of conversation at a funeral? Because of the past, Evan said. He looked up then, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me. It was pity, but it was rehearsed. Look, Ari, Mom just wants to protect you from the stress of it all. Handling an estate is heavy stuff. Maybe it is better if you just let them handle the details and you take the help they offer. It is the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance. Did Mom tell you to say that? I asked. No, Evan said, too quickly. No, obviously not. I'm just saying, we talked about it this week, and we all think— Wait, I interrupted. You talked about it this week? When? Evan froze. He realized his mistake. Just at dinner, a couple of nights ago, when we were planning the flowers. I wasn't at dinner a couple of nights ago, I said. I was at the print shop getting the programs done. It wasn't a formal meeting, Evan stammered. Just family talk. I am family, I said. My voice was quiet, but it felt like glass in my throat. You know what I mean, Evan said, pushing off the wall. Don't be like this. Ari, just chill. We are all on the same team. He tossed the vape pen into his pocket and headed back inside, leaving me alone in the cold. They had met. They had strategized. They had a plan for the Ariana problem, and Evan was part of it. I turned back to the lake, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. I angrily wiped it away. I was not going to cry for them. You have her jawline. The voice came from my left. I turned to see an older woman standing there. She was wearing a heavy wool coat and a silk scarf tied tightly around her neck. Her hair was silver, cut in a sharp bob, and she was smoking a thin, brown cigarette. Excuse me? I said. Margot, the woman said. You have her jawline. Stubborn. Everyone else in your family has weak chins, but not you. I recognized her then. It was Irene Dalka. She had been Margot's friend for 40 years, a woman who traveled extensively and rarely showed up to family events. I hadn't seen her in a decade. Hello, Mrs. Dalka, I said. I didn't know you were here. I stayed in the back, she said. She took a drag of her cigarette and blew the smoke away from me. I don't have the patience for your mother's theater, but I wanted to see you. Me? Irene turned to face me fully. Her eyes were dark and assessing. Margot talked about you often, in the last few years especially. She did? This surprised me. I thought she was disappointed in me. Disappointed? Irene let out a short, sharp laugh. No, worried. Yes. Angry, certainly. But not at you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Did you get the letters? I frowned. What letters? Irene's expression shifted. The amusement vanished, replaced by a sharp alertness. The letters Margot sent, she told me she mailed 3 of them to you over the last 2 years. She said she gave them to family members to hand-deliver because she didn't trust the post office with the contents. My stomach dropped. I never got any letters. Irene stared at me for a long moment. She looked disturbed. She looked like a woman confirming a suspicion she desperately hoped was wrong. Mrs. Dalka, I said, stepping closer. What was in the letters? If you didn't get them, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, then that answers the question. She dropped her cigarette to the stone pavers and crushed it out with her heel. Be careful, Ariana. Grief makes people greedy, but fear makes them dangerous. Wait, I said as she turned to leave. What does that mean? What should I do? She paused but didn't look back. Check your mail, dear, and don't sign anything. She walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building toward the parking lot. I stood there, shivering, the echo of Margot's voice in my head merging with Irene's warning, don't sign anything. 2 days later, the email arrived. I was at work, trying to catch up on the emails that had piled up during my bereavement leave. The subject line popped up at 10 in the morning. Estate of Margot Griffin, scheduling preliminary documents. It was from Halloway & Crane, LLP, the family law firm. I opened it. The body of the email was standard professional courtesy. The reading of the last will and testament was scheduled for Thursday at 2 o'clock. My attendance was requested, but there was an attachment. A PDF titled Griffin_family_settlement_outline_draft. The email text read, Per the request of Darlene Griffin, Executor, please review the attached outline prior to our meeting. Mrs. Griffin suggests that executing this preliminary agreement will expedite the probate process and ensure immediate liquidity for all beneficiaries. I downloaded the PDF. It was 7 pages long. I started reading. The legalese was dense, but I worked in operations. I knew how to read contracts. I knew how to spot the trapdoors. The document was framed as a voluntary family agreement. It proposed a simplified distribution method. Paragraph 4. Beneficiary agrees to waive any and all rights to contest the validity of the will. Paragraph 7. Beneficiary agrees to waive the requirement for a full formal accounting of the estate's assets and historic transactions prior to the date of death. Paragraph 12. In lieu of any fractional interest in real property, specifically the Lindenmere Road estate, Ariana Griffin shall accept a fixed cash settlement of $25,000, to be paid within 30 days. I sat back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. $25,000. It was a lot of money. To the Ariana they thought I was, the Ariana drowning in debt, it would look like a life raft. It would look like salvation. But the cost was total silence. If I signed this, I couldn't ask where the rest of the money went. I couldn't ask about the house. I couldn't ask why Irene's letters never reached me. I was agreeing to take a payout and walk away, blindfolded. This wasn't kindness. It was a gag order. My phone rang. It was Darlene. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Hello? Did you get the email? She asked. No preamble. She sounded tight, anxious. I got it, I said. I am reading it now. Good, she said, her voice relaxing slightly into that fake warmth. Graham Halloway drafted that up for us. Dad and I thought it would be so much easier for everyone. You know how long probate takes. Ariana, it can drag on for years. This way, you get your share immediately. We know you could use the cash flow. My share, I said. $25,000. It is a generous amount, Darlene said sharply. Considering the debts the estate has to cover and the repairs the lake house needs, honestly, we are stretching to make that happen for you. And the waiver? I asked. The part where I waive the right to see the accounting? That is just standard language, she dismissed. It just saves money on lawyers. Why would you need to see boring spreadsheets? It is just wasting the estate's value. I am not signing it. Mom, the silence on the other end was absolute. It lasted for 5 seconds. Excuse me? She said. The warmth was gone. The ice was back. I am not signing it, I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the shaking of my hand. Grandma asked me not to sign anything until I understood it. I don't understand why I need to waive my rights to see the books. Grandma was on heavy medication at the end, Darlene snapped. She didn't know what she was saying. She seemed pretty clear to me. Ariana, Darlene said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. After all we have done for you, after we supported you through the divorce, after we welcomed you back when you had nothing, you are going to be difficult? You are going to throw this back in our faces? I am not throwing anything, I said. I am just waiting for the will reading. You are being selfish, she spat. Just like you were when you left your husband, always thinking about yourself. If you don't sign that paper, you might end up with nothing. Do you understand that? The legal fees will eat everything up. Then I guess I will end up with nothing, I said. I will see you on Thursday. I hung up. I put the phone down and realized I was gasping for air. I had never hung up on my mother in my life. I had never said no to a direct command from the family. I felt nauseous. But beneath the nausea, there was a tiny, flickering spark of something else. Anger. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt too quiet. I kept thinking about Irene's words. I sent 3 letters. Where were they? I got out of bed and went to the spare closet where I kept my box of shame. That was what I called it. It was a plastic bin filled with the debris of my divorce, legal papers, old bank statements, tax returns from the bad years. I hauled it into the living room and dumped it onto the rug. If Margot had sent letters, maybe I had missed them. Maybe I had tucked them away in a pile of junk mail during one of my depressive episodes. I sifted through the paper, old utility bills, the decree absolute of my divorce, a stack of rejection letters from jobs I had applied for in 2019. No letters from Margot. I was about to shove it all back in when a thin, stapled document slid out from between 2 tax folders. It was a credit report. I frowned. I didn't remember running my credit report in 2018. That was the year after the divorce, the year I was barely functioning. I picked it up. The date on the top was June 14th, 2018. I scanned the pages. The score was low. I knew that. But as I looked at the inquiries section, something caught my eye. There were 6 hard inquiries in the span of 3 months. 2 for store credit cards, 3 for personal loans, 1 for a car lease. All of them were denied. I looked at the address listed for the applicant on the inquiries. 44 Lindenmere Road, Briar Glen, Vermont. My breath hitched. That wasn't my address. I had never lived at 44 Lindenmere Road. That was the address of the family lake house, Grandma Margot's house. But Grandma didn't need a loan for a car lease. She didn't shop at the stores listed, and she certainly wouldn't have used my social security number. I sat there on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands. 2018. The year I was crashing on friends' couches. The year I was too depressed to open my mail. Someone had used my identity to apply for credit, using the lake house as the address. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the floor, staring at the paper, connecting the dots. Don't worry. Ariana can't afford a +1. We just want to help you sleep at night. They needed me to be broke. They needed me to be a mess. Because if I was a mess, no one would question why my credit was ruined. No one would look twice if Ariana the screw-up had a few more defaults on her record. At 8 o'clock sharp, I called the credit bureau hotline. I navigated the automated menu with robotic precision. Finally, I got a human. I am looking at an old report, I told the agent, my voice calm and cold. I see inquiries from 2018 tied to an address I never lived at. Can you tell me if any accounts were successfully opened? The agent typed for a moment. I see those inquiries, ma'am. It looks like most were declined. But yes, there is a revolving line of credit that was opened in July 2018. It was closed in 2020. The payment history is spotty. Several late payments. What was the mailing address for the statements? I asked. 44 Lindenmere Road, the agent confirmed. And the authorized user? Just you, ma'am. Although, wait, there is a secondary name listed on the initial application as a co-signer, but it was removed later. A D. Griffin. Darlene. The room spun. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. My mother had opened a credit line in my name, used it, missed payments, and then closed it. She had tanked my credit score at the exact moment I was trying to rebuild my life. Ma'am, do you want to dispute this? The agent asked. This looks like identity theft. We can flag it. Not yet, I said. I need to gather more information. Just freeze my credit for now. Hard freeze on everything. Done. I hung up. I sat there for a long time. The sadness I had felt at the funeral was gone. The guilt I had felt for not signing the settlement was gone. The text from Evan asking for money, the family card offer, it wasn't generosity, it was guilt. It was cover. They had been using me as a financial resource and a scapegoat for years. I stood up. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. But I had Margot's jawline. I wasn't going to call Darlene. I wasn't going to scream at Marshall. I wasn't going to confront Evan. Not yet. They wanted me to be emotional. They wanted me to be the hysterical, unstable charity case so they could pat my head and hand me $25,000 to go away. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I would walk into Holloway and Crane tomorrow. I would sit in the chair. I would keep my mouth shut, and I would listen to every single word my grandmother had to say. I dried my face with a towel. I was done being the victim. I was ready to be the reckoning. Mortimer Legal Clinic was nothing like the polished mahogany and glass fortress of Holloway and Crane. It was tucked into a converted brick row house on 4th Street, sandwiched between a bakery and a chiropractor's office. The waiting room smelled faintly of yeast and old carpet, and the receptionist was a college student who didn't look up from her textbook when I walked in. It was exactly what I needed. I didn't want prestige. I wanted the truth. I sat across from Lena Mortimer in her cramped office. She was a woman in her 50s with short, steel gray hair and glasses perched on the end of a nose that looked like it had been broken once. Her desk was a chaotic sea of manila folders, but her eyes, when they locked onto mine, were terrifyingly focused. "Let me get this straight," Lena said, leaning back in her creaky leather chair. "Your grandmother died 3 days ago. Her funeral was yesterday, and your mother, the executor, has already sent you a settlement agreement asking you to waive your right to an accounting?" "Yes," I said. I pushed the printout of the email and the PDF across the desk. She said it was to keep things simple, to save the estate money. Lena picked up the document. She didn't read it like a normal person. She scanned it like a predator looking for a pulse. Her eyebrows shot up once, then furrowed. She made a small noise in her throat that sounded like a growl. "Simple," Lena muttered. "That is one word for it. Predatory is another." She tossed the paper back onto the desk. "Ariana, this is not standard. This is aggressively one-sided. Paragraph 7 alone is a red flag the size of a billboard. Waiving the accounting means you are agreeing to never ask where the money went. If the estate was worth $2 million and they tell you it is worth $200,000, and you sign this, you have no recourse. You are blindly accepting whatever number they write on a check." "She offered $25,000, I said quietly. "In lieu of property interests," Lena quoted from memory. She looked at me over her glasses. "Do you know what the Lindenmere property is worth?" "I am not sure. Maybe $600,000? It is old, but it is right on the water. Lakefront property in Briar Glen has skyrocketed in the last 3 years," Lena said. "That lot alone is likely worth close to $1 million. And she wants to buy you out for $25,000? That isn't a settlement. That is a theft." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I had known it was bad, but hearing it laid out in mathematical terms made it real. "So I shouldn't sign it." "Absolutely not," Lena said. You are going to request a full formal accounting. We will draft a letter today. We will demand an inventory of assets as of the date of death, and we will demand transaction records for the last 5 years. If they have nothing to hide, they will provide it. If they panic, well, then we know exactly what we are dealing with. There is something else, I said. My hand trembled as I reached into my bag and pulled out the credit report I had printed that morning. I found this last night. I slid the paper over to her. Lena adjusted her glasses and looked at the highlighted sections. She traced the line with her finger where Disa Griffin was listed as a co-applicant on the closed account. This is an old report, Lena noted. 2018. I never lived at that address, I said, my voice steady but tight. I never applied for those loans. I think my mother used my identity. Lena went very still. She looked up at me, her expression shifting from attorney to confidant. Identity theft within families is more common than people want to admit, she said softly. But proving it is difficult, especially if it happened years ago and the accounts are closed. I called the bureau. They confirmed the account existed. That is a start, Lena said. But be careful. If you accuse her of a felony without hard evidence, signed documents, IP addresses, witness statements, she will spin it. She will say she was helping you. She will say you asked her to do it because your credit was bad. She will turn it into a story about how she tried to save you, and you are the ungrateful daughter trying to ruin her reputation. I stared at the floor. That was exactly what Darlene would do. I was just trying to help her sleep at night. So what do? I asked. You gather facts, Lena said. You don't make accusations. You build a wall of paper so high they can't climb over it, and you protect yourself immediately. She leaned forward. Have you frozen your credit? I asked for a freeze this morning. Good. Check it again. Set a pin that no one in your family could guess. Not your birthday, not your grandmother's birthday. Make it random. I left the office 20 minutes later with a retainer agreement signed and a plan in place. The wind on 4th Street was biting, whipping my hair across my face. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone. I opened the credit bureau app. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my password twice. Finally, I got in. Freeze status. Pending PIN setup. I took a deep breath. I thought about the dates. I thought about the birthdays. I typed in a 6-digit number that had no connection to the Griffins. It was the date I had adopted my cat. It was silly, but it was mine. Status, frozen. I stared at the screen. It was a small, digital shield, but it felt like I had just put on armor. For 7 years, I had been an open door for them. Now, the lock was turned. I needed to clear my head before going back to the duplex. I didn't want to go home and stare at the empty walls. I started driving, aimlessly at first, then found myself turning toward the library. The Briar Glen Public Library was a sanctuary. It was a limestone building from the 1920s with high arched windows and the smell of dust and floor wax. I used to hide here when I was a teenager, tucking myself into the back corner of the history section to read for hours. I walked in, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket. I wandered through the stacks, running my fingers along the spines of the books. I thought I might find you here. The voice was low and smoky. I turned to see Irene Dalka standing at the end of the aisle. She was wearing a trench coat and holding a stack of gardening magazines. Mrs. Dalka, I said. Irene, I was just killing time. Time is the one thing we never have enough of, she said. She walked toward me, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. Did you look? Look for what? The letters, she said. Her eyes searched my face. I looked, I said. I went through everything I have. There were no letters. Irene let out a long sigh. She looked away, toward a shelf of biographies. I knew it, she whispered. I told Margot that sending them through Darlene was a mistake. But Margot, she wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that if she put a sealed envelope in her daughter's hand and said, "Give this to Ariana," that Darlene would do it. Darlene never gave me anything, I said. Except guilt. Irene reached into her pocket. Margot wasn't naive. Ariana, she was hopeful. But she wasn't stupid. She gave me something to keep for her about 6 months ago. She made me promise to hold it until she was gone, and to give it to you only if you confirmed that the letters never arrived. She held out her hand. Resting on her palm was a silver key on a plain metal ring. I looked at it. It looked familiar. Is this the key to the lake house? It is a key to the lake house, Irene corrected. But not the front door, and it is not the old one. She had this cut recently. I took the key. It was cold and heavy. She said you would know when to use it, Irene said. She said you were the only one who remembered the hiding spots. The hiding spots, I repeated. A memory flickered in the back of my mind. Playing hide and seek with my cousins when we were 10. Me. Squeezing into spaces they couldn't fit. Go, Irene said. The house is empty right now. Darlene is at the florist settling the bill for the funeral flowers. Marshall is at the country club. How do you know that? Irene smiled. A thin, sharp expression. I have my ways, and I have very little patience for people who steal letters from dying women. I drove to Lindenmere Road with my heart hammering in my throat. The lake house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by towering pines. It was a sprawling, shingle-style house with a wraparound porch and windows that looked like eyes staring out at the water. There were no cars in the driveway. I parked my sedan near the detached garage, hidden from the main road by a hedge of rhododendrons. I walked up to the house. The wind was coming off the lake, damp and cold. I tried the front door first, just to check. Locked. I took out my own set of keys. The ones I had carried for years. The ones that used to open this door. I slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. They had changed the locks. Of course they had. They must have done it immediately after she died. Maybe even before. It was a physical manifestation of the settlement agreement. You are locked out. I looked at the key Irene had given me. She said you would know when to use it. I walked around the side of the house, past the dormant hydrangeas and the wicker furniture covered in tarps. There was a small side door near the kitchen. The one the caterers used. The one we used to sneak in through when we were muddy from the lake. I slid the new key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and wood smoke, the scent of my childhood. But it also smelled of abandonment. The heat had been turned down low, and the air was chilly. "Grandma?" I whispered, half expecting her to answer from the living room. Silence. I moved through the kitchen. It was spotless. Darlene had been here, cleaning, organizing, erasing. The counters were bare. The refrigerator was empty except for a few bottles of water. The hiding spots. I stood in the center of the kitchen and closed my eyes. Where did I go when I wanted to disappear? The attic? No. Too hard to access now. The basement? Too damp. Then I remembered. The pantry. It was a walk-in pantry off the kitchen, lined with shelves of canned goods and jars of preserves. When I was 8, I had discovered that the floorboard in the back corner, under the bottom shelf, was loose. I used to hide my diary there. I used to hide candy there that I didn't want Evan to steal. Margot had caught me once. She hadn't scolded me. She had just winked and said, "Everyone needs a place that is just theirs." I opened the pantry door. It creaked. I knelt on the linoleum floor and crawled to the back corner. The shelves were still stocked with Margot's jars of tomato sauce and pickled peppers. I pushed aside a heavy crate of sparkling water. There it was. The board was slightly misaligned, the gap just a fraction wider than the others. I dug my fingernails into the gap and pulled. It resisted for a moment, then popped up. Beneath the floorboard, nestled in the insulation, was a gray metal lockbox. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an old, dusty box. It was new. The metal was shiny. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I set it on the pantry floor and tried the key Irene had given me. It slid into the small lock on the front of the box perfectly. I turned it. The latch sprang open. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no cash. There were no jewels. There was only paper. On top sat a thick ledger, bound in black leather. Beneath it were stacks of bank statements, clipped together by year, and on the very top, a white envelope with my name written in Margot's shaky, elegant script. For Ariana. Open after. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the light from the pantry window illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I picked up the ledger first. The title page said simply, 7 years. I turned the page. It was an accounting log, but not like any I had seen at work. It was handwritten, columns drawn with a ruler, date, recipient, stated reason, amount, truth. I ran my finger down the first page, dated 5 years ago, March 12th. Evan Griffin. Stated reason, rent shortfall/eviction risk. Amount, $2,000. Truth, ski trip to Aspen, confirmed via social media, July 4th. Darlene Griffin. Stated reason, Ariana medical emergency copay reimbursement. Amount, $1,500. Truth, unknown. Ariana confirmed no medical event. I gasped. I read that entry again. Ariana medical emergency. My mother had asked Grandma for money, claiming I was sick, and then pocketed it. I flipped forward. The pages were filled with entries. September 20th. Marshall Griffin. Stated reason, legal retainer for Ariana's debt consolidation. Amount, $5,000. Truth, country club dues. December 15th. Evan Griffin. Stated reason, car repair. Amount, $800. Truth, designer clothing purchase. Tears pricked my eyes. It went on and on. For 7 years, they had used my name as a currency. They had painted a portrait of me as a disaster, sick, broke, litigious, irresponsible, and they had cashed checks against that portrait. Margot knew. She had known the whole time. People call you a charity case because it helps them sleep at night. She hadn't just meant emotionally. She meant they were literally profiting from the lie. If I was the charity case, then giving them money for Ariana was a noble act. It justified the withdrawals. I put the ledger down, my hands trembling violently. I picked up the sealed envelope. I tore it open. My dearest Ariana, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found your way back to the pantry. Smart girl, I am sorry. That is the first thing I must say. I am sorry that I watched this happen and did not stop it sooner. I thought, for a long time, that keeping the peace was the highest virtue. I thought that if I gave them money, they would leave you alone. I was wrong. The more I gave, the more they needed you to be broken. The charity case label was never about you, my love. It was a cover story, a convenient narrative. If you were incompetent, then Darlene had to manage your affairs. If you were desperate, then Evan had to borrow on your behalf. They built a cage for you out of lies, and I let them lock you in it. But there is something else you need to know. Something older. Your divorce was not just bad luck. You have always blamed yourself for how badly it went, for how much you lost. You told me you signed papers you didn't understand because you were depressed. But I had my suspicions. 3 years ago, I commissioned a private audit of the family accounts. I found copies of documents related to your divorce settlement. Specifically, the refinance application for your marital home and the power of attorney you supposedly granted to Marshall to handle the sale. I have included the copies here. Look at the signatures. Ariana, look at the dates. You were in the hospital with pneumonia on the date the power of attorney was signed. They didn't just kick you when you were down. They pushed you down so they could pick your pockets. Do not sign their settlement. Do not let them win. Burn it down, Ariana. But build yourself something better from the ashes. Love, Grandma. I dropped the letter. I felt cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to radiate from the center of my chest. The power of attorney. I dug through the bottom of the box. I found a manila envelope labeled The Divorce. I pulled out the papers. There it was, a general power of attorney, granting Marshall Griffin full authority to sell my marital home and handle the proceeds. It was dated November 14th, 7 years ago. Margot was right. On November 14th, I was in the emergency room with severe pneumonia, dehydrated and delirious. I couldn't have signed a menu, let alone a legal document. I looked at the signature, Ariana Griffin. It looked like my handwriting, but the loops on the A were too round. The slant was slightly off. It was a good forgery, practiced, but it wasn't mine. And the refinance application, it showed that the equity in my house, $60,000, had been cashed out 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized. The funds were deposited into an account I didn't recognize. I sat there, the pieces falling into place like a guillotine blade. I hadn't lost my savings because of bad legal fees. I hadn't lost my house because the market crashed. My father had stolen the equity. My mother had stolen my credit. My brother had stolen my reputation. And they had done it while hugging me and telling me everything was going to be okay. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal sound of rage and betrayal. I wanted to run to the rental house and throw these papers in Marshall's face. I wanted to scream at Darlene until she shattered. But then I looked at the ledger again. Truth. If I screamed now, they would gaslight me. They would say I was crazy. They would say the papers were old drafts. They would destroy the originals if they could find them. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be Margot's granddaughter. I took out my phone. My hands were still shaking, so I braced my elbows on my knees to steady them. I photographed every page of the ledger. I photographed the bank statements. I photographed the forged power of attorney and the refinance application, making sure the dates and signatures were in sharp focus. I photographed the letter from Margot. I created a new folder on my phone, password protected, and uploaded everything to the cloud immediately. Then, I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I put everything back in the box. I placed the papers in the order I found them. I put the ledger on top. I locked the box. I put the box back into the space under the floorboard. I pushed the board back down until it sat flush with the others. I dragged the crate of sparkling water back over the spot. I stood up and brushed the dust off my knees. I wasn't going to blow this up today. They still thought I was the charity case. They thought I was weak. They thought I was scared. That was my advantage. I walked out of the pantry. I locked the side door with the new key. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots, sounding like countdown seconds. As I drove away from Lindenmere, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house looked peaceful, silent and stately against the gray sky. But I knew what was buried in its heart now. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. Revenge was emotional. Revenge was messy. I was chasing justice, and justice required evidence. I drove back toward town, my mind racing. I had the photos. I had the truth. Now I just had to survive the will reading without letting them see the fire in my eyes. I stopped at a red light. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Darlene. Just checking in. Hope you are being sensible about the agreement. We all want what is best for you. I stared at the message. Best for you. I typed a reply, my fingers moving slowly and deliberately. I will see you at the reading. Mom. I hit send. The light turned green. I drove forward, no longer the girl who needed their charity, but the woman who held the receipt for everything they had stolen. The Wednesday morning sun was bright and deceptive, casting a golden light over Briar Glen that made the town look like a postcard for wholesome American living. I drove toward the Hearthstone Cafe with a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Darlene had texted me the night before, a message filled with emojis and exclamation points, inviting me to a family healing breakfast. She called it a peace offering. She said we needed to center ourselves before the formalities of the will reading. I didn't believe her. I had the photos of the ledger on my phone. I had the image of her signature on the credit application burned into my mind. But I went anyway. I went because Lena Mortimer had told me that appearing reasonable was a strategic advantage, and because I needed to see their faces one more time before the war started. The Hearthstone Cafe was the kind of place that specialized in oversized cinnamon rolls and aggressive rustic charm. When I walked in, the smell of maple syrup and bacon grease hit me, instantly triggering memories of Sunday brunches from a decade ago. Before everything fell apart, I spotted them in the back corner booth. It wasn't just Darlene and my father. It was a full tribunal. Aunt Lydia was there, picking at a fruit cup. My cousin Rebecca was scrolling on her phone. Evan was staring into a coffee mug like it held the secrets of the universe. Darlene saw me first. She waved, a gesture that involved her entire arm and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ariana, over here!" I walked to the table. The conversation died instantly. It was the silence of a group that had been talking about the person who just arrived. "Hi, everyone," I said. Sliding into the empty chair at the end of the table, it felt like the kid's seat, exposed and separate from the core group. "We ordered you the blueberry pancakes," Darlene said, pushing a plate toward me. "I know they are your favorite." They had been my favorite when I was 12. I hadn't eaten gluten in 3 years. Something Darlene would have known if she ever asked me a single question about my actual life. "Thank you," I said. I didn't pick up my fork. "We just wanted to get everyone together," Marshall said. He was wearing a polo shirt that strained against his chest, and he looked impatient. "Clear the air. Tomorrow is going to be a heavy day." "It has been a heavy week," I said. "Exactly," Darlene said. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. "And we hate to see you so stressed. Ariana, we really do. We know how hard you struggle with complexity." I pulled my hand back, tucking it into my lap. "I am managing." "Are you?" Aunt Lydia chimed in. Her voice was sharp, like a bird's beak pecking at glass. "We heard you were asking questions at the bank and seeing some discount lawyer in town." My heart skipped a beat. Briar Glen was a small town. Lena Mortimer's office was on 4th Street. Of course someone had seen me. "I am just getting my bearings," I said neutrally. Darlene sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thin blue folder. She slid it across the table, right over the blueberry pancakes. "This is why we are worried," she said softly. "You panic, Ariana. You always have. You get overwhelmed, and then you make bad decisions, like that lawyer. You don't have the money for a legal battle. Honey, we know that." She tapped the blue folder. "So, Dad and I stayed up late last night and came up with a solution. A simpler version of the settlement. We removed some of the legal jargon that might have confused you. We increased the cash payout to $30,000, immediate transfer, no waiting for probate, no lawyers taking a cut." I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. "And the conditions?" I asked. "Are they the same?" "It is just standard family protection language." Marshall grunted. "Standard. Does it still say I waive my right to an accounting?" I asked. The table went dead silent. Evan looked up from his coffee, his eyes wide and fearful. Rebecca stopped scrolling. "Ariana," Darlene said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, soft register. "Why are you obsessed with accounting? It is boring paperwork. It is insulting that you think we would cheat you." "If you aren't cheating me," I said, keeping my voice level, "then showing me the books shouldn't be a problem. It is a waste of time." Marshall slammed his hand on the table. The silverware clattered. A few people at nearby tables looked over. "You are being ungrateful. Do you know that? Ungrateful and petulant." "Marshall," Darlene warned, but he ignored her. "No," Marshall said, pointing a thick finger at me. "She needs to hear this. For 7 years, we have carried you. We picked you up when your marriage imploded. We helped you when you were drowning in debt. We have been the safety net you didn't deserve. And now, when we try to give you a clean break, a gift, you want to audit us? You can't even stand on your own 2 feet. Ariana." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The old Ariana, the one who believed their narrative, would have crumpled. She would have cried. She would have signed the paper just to make the yelling stop. But I wasn't that Ariana anymore. I was the woman who had seen the ledger. I was the woman who knew that the safety net was actually a trap. I looked my father in the eye. I didn't blink. "I have been standing," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "I have been standing for 7 years. You just didn't like the view. Marshall's face turned a mottled shade of red. What did you say to me? I said I am not signing, I stated. I stood up. I have retained counsel. Her name is Lena Mortimer. Any further documents can be sent to her office. And I expect a full, formal accounting of the estate assets and all transactions dating back 5 years. I looked at Darlene. She wasn't red like Marshall. She was pale, her lips pressed into a thin white line. She looked at me with something that wasn't anger. It was calculation. She was reassessing the threat level. You are making a mistake, Darlene whispered. A very expensive mistake. I guess we will find out, I said. I turned and walked out of the cafe. I left the pancakes. I left the blue folder. I walked out into the sunshine. My legs shaking so hard I thought I might collapse, but I kept moving. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps pounding on the pavement behind me. Ari, wait up! It was Evan. He caught up to me near the parking meter. Out of breath, his face flushed. Jesus, Ari, he panted. That was intense. It was necessary, I said, unlocking my car door. I didn't want to talk to him. I couldn't look at him without seeing the entry in the ledger. Evan Griffin. Rent shortfall. Truth. Ski trip. You can't do this, Evan pleaded. He grabbed my arm, not roughly, but desperate. You can't tear the family apart like this. She is going to go nuclear. Just take the 30 grand. It is a lot of money. We? I interrupted, pulling my arm away. There is no we, Evan. There hasn't been a we in a long time. I am on your side, he insisted. I tried to tell them to ease up, but you know how Dad gets. I have a question for you, I said. I turned to face him fully. I watched his eyes. A simple question. Okay, he said nervously. What? Did you ever run a credit check in my name? Or open an account using my social security number? The reaction was instantaneous. He froze. It wasn't a pause of confusion. It was a pause of recognition. His eyes darted to the left, then back to me. His pupils dilated. No, he said. No way. Why would I do that? He said it too fast. He said it with the frantic energy of a liar who had been anticipating the accusation. You are lying, I said softly. I am not, he shouted, his voice cracking. You are being paranoid. Ari, seriously, you need help. Goodbye, Evan, I said. I got into my car and slammed the door. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove away. He stood there on the curb, looking small and terrified. He looked like a man who knew the avalanche had already started. I needed to go to the lake house. I didn't know why. Exactly. Maybe I needed to feel close to Margot. Maybe I needed to reassure myself that the box was still there, that the evidence was safe. I knew I had the photos, but the physical reality of the ledger felt like an anchor. I drove to Lindenmere Road. The anxiety from the breakfast was vibrating under my skin. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. The rhododendrons near the garage were trampled. There were tire tracks in the gravel that hadn't been there yesterday. Fresh, deep ruts in the mud from the morning dew. I parked and ran to the side door. It was unlocked. My stomach dropped. I had locked it. I vividly remembered the heavy click of the deadbolt when I left yesterday. I pushed the door open. Hello? I called out. The house was silent, but it wasn't the stillness of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of violation. I ran to the pantry. The door was wide open. The crate of sparkling water had been shoved aside, knocking over a jar of peaches that had shattered on the floor. Sticky syrup and glass were everywhere. The floorboard had been ripped up. It wasn't pried carefully like I had done. It had been gouged out. Splintering the wood, the hole was empty. The gray metal box was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space between the joists. I felt a wave of dizziness so strong I had to grab the door frame to stay upright. They knew. They hadn't just come to clean. You don't rip up floorboards to clean. Someone knew exactly where to look. Or maybe they didn't know exactly. Maybe they had torn the house apart until they found it. I backed out of the pantry. my boots crunching on the broken glass. I checked the rest of the kitchen. Drawers were pulled out. Papers were scattered on the counters. It was a targeted search. My pulse spiked, hammering in my ears. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were slippery with sweat. I called Lena. "Mortimer Legal," she answered on the second ring. "They broke in," I said. My voice sounded high and thin. "I am at the lake house. The side door was unlocked. The pantry floor is ripped up. Things are missing." "Are you safe?" Lena asked sharply. "Is anyone else there?" "No, I am alone. But the box with the ledger, it is gone." "Okay, listen to me," Lena said, her voice turning calm and commanding. "Get out of the house. Go to your car and lock the doors. Do not touch anything else. They took the evidence. Lena, we have the photos," she reminded me. "You uploaded them, right?" "Yes." "Then we have the evidence. What they have is stolen property. Ariana, I want you to call the Briar Glen Police, not 911, the non-emergency line. Report a break-in. Report that estate property has been removed without authorization." "If I call the police, I am accusing my family," I said. "No," Lena corrected. "You are the co-trustee of the estate. You are reporting a theft from the estate. You don't know who did it. You just know it happened. Let the police connect the dots. We need a paper trail. We need an official report number to file for an emergency preservation order." "Okay," I said. "Okay, I can do that." "Do it now. Then come to my office." I hung up and dialed the police. I gave the report in a robotic monotone, describing the damage, the missing items. I didn't say, "My mother stole it." I said, "I arrived to find the property unsecured and items removed." As I was waiting for the officer to arrive, my phone buzzed again. It was Irene. "Ariana," she said, her voice breathless. "Where are you?" "I am at the lake house. Someone broke in." "I knew it," Irene said. "I drove by earlier, around 8 this morning. On my way to the market, I saw a car in the driveway." "What kind of car?" "A black SUV," Irene said. "A Lexus. It was Darlene's car. I am sure of it, and Marshall was standing on the porch." The timeline clicked into place. They had come here before the breakfast. They had raided the house, found the box, and then driven to the cafe to offer me pancakes and a $30,000 hush payment. They knew what was in the box. They had seen the ledger. They knew I had the ammunition to destroy them, but they didn't know if I had seen it yet. The settlement offer was a Hail Mary. They wanted to buy my signature before I opened the box. But I had already opened it. "Thank you, Irene," I said. "I have to go. The police are here." The next hour was a blur of statements and flashing lights. The officer was polite, taking notes, photographing the shattered jar and the gouged floor. He asked if I had any suspects. I said, "The family has keys, but the locks were changed recently." I left it at that. When the officer left, I didn't go to Lena's. I drove straight to the rental house. I shouldn't have done it. Lena would have told me it was a mistake, but the rage was burning so hot in my chest that logic had evaporated. I pulled up to the curb. Darlene's black Lexus was in the driveway. I marched up the steps and pounded on the door. Darlene opened it. She was still wearing the same outfit from breakfast, a silk blouse and tailored trousers. She looked composed, holding a glass of white wine even though it was barely noon. "Ariana," she said. She didn't step back to let me in. "To what do we owe this pleasure? Did you change your mind about the settlement?" "Give it back," I said. She took a sip of wine. "I don't know what you are talking about." "The metal box," I said, stepping closer. "From the pantry. I know you were there this morning. Irene saw you. I know you took it." Darlene's expression didn't flicker. She looked at me with a terrifying kind of pity. "You sound hysterical. Ariana, a metal box? In the pantry? Margot kept canned tomatoes in the pantry." "I saw the ledger." "Mom," I said, "I saw the payments. I saw the medical emergency money you took. I saw the rent Evan claimed. I saw everything." For a second, just a split second. Her mask slipped, her eyes widened, and her hand tightened on the wine glass. But then she recovered. "You are imagining things," she said coldly. "You are grieving, and you are projecting your own failures onto us. There was no box. There is no ledger." "I have photos," I lied. Well, it wasn't a lie, but she didn't know that for sure. "Do you?" She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "And who is going to believe you? A divorced, bankrupt woman with a history of depression against the word of the entire family? We are respected in this town. Ariana, you are the charity case. No one will take your word over ours." "It is not my word," I said. "It is evidence." "If you had evidence," Darlene said, leaning forward, her perfume cloying and sweet, "you would have used it by now. Instead, you are standing on my porch making scenes. Go home, Ariana. Take the deal, because if you keep pushing, you won't just lose the money, you will lose everything. We will make sure of it." She slammed the door in my face. I stood there, staring at the wood grain. She wasn't afraid of the truth. She was arrogant enough to believe she could suppress it. She believed that power and reputation were stronger than facts. For 7 years, she had been right. I turned and walked back to my car. I felt a strange calm settling over me. It wasn't peace. It was clarity. She had just confirmed everything. She had drawn the battle lines. I drove to Lena's office. I walked in and sat down. "File it," I said. Lena looked at me. "The police report?" "That, and the emergency request to the probate court. Request an immediate inventory and a preservation order. Request a neutral administrator if you have to. I want to lock the estate down so tight they can't buy a pack of gum without a judge signing off on it." Lena smiled. It was a wolfish smile. "Now you are talking." We spent the afternoon drafting the petition. It was aggressive. It cited the break-in, the removal of potential assets, and the conflict of interest with Darlene acting as executor. It was a declaration of war filed in triplicate. I left the office at 5 o'clock. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I felt exhausted, drained to the marrow of my bones. I drove back to my duplex. I wanted a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The air was stale. I tossed my keys on the table. My phone chimed. "You have a new email." I pulled it out. It was from an address I didn't recognize. Observer 884. The subject line was blank. I opened it. The body of the email contained a single sentence in all caps. "Stop digging, or you'll end up with nothing." Attached was a photo. I tapped it. The image loaded. It was a photo of my duplex, but it wasn't a Google Street View image. It was taken from the street. At night, I could see my car in the driveway. I could see the glow of my living room lamp in the window, and I could see my silhouette moving behind the curtains. The photo had been taken last night. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I backed away from the window, my heart slamming against my ribs. This wasn't just financial manipulation anymore. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was a threat. Stop digging. They weren't just protecting the money. They were protecting themselves from criminal liability, fraud, identity theft, forgery. If the ledger came out, if the police saw the truth. My family wasn't just going to lose the lake house. They were going to go to prison, and they knew it. I looked at the window. The curtains were open. I felt exposed, watched. I crawled across the floor, staying below the window line, and retrieved my phone. I didn't cry. The fear was there, cold and sharp, but underneath it was the steel that Margot had left me. I texted my friend, Chloe. She was a gym teacher, 6 feet tall, and took no nonsense. "Emergency. Can you come over? Bring your dog." Then I called my landlord. "Hi, Mr. Henderson. I need to request permission to install a security camera. Immediately. Tonight." "Is everything okay, Ariana?" he asked. "No," I said, my eyes fixed on the dark glass of the window. "But it is going to be." I sat in the hallway, away from the windows, clutching the phone, Darlene thought she was managing a variable. She thought she was disciplining a child. She didn't realize that by threatening me, she had freed me. I wasn't keeping the peace anymore. I was surviving, and if they wanted a war, they were going to get one. I opened the photos of the ledger on my phone again. I looked at the column titled Truth. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see who blinks first." The conference room at Holloway and Crane was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space on the third floor, paneled in dark mahogany that seemed to absorb the light, dominated by a table long enough to land a small aircraft. The chairs were heavy leather, the kind that groaned when you sat in them, and the view out the window was a curated slice of Briar Glen's town square, suggesting that the people inside this room owned everything they could see. My family had arrived early. That was part of the strategy. By the time I walked in at 1:55 in the afternoon, they had already claimed the high ground. Marshall and Darlene were seated at the head of the table. Flanking the empty chair reserved for the attorney, Evan was on the right, looking pale and jittery, tapping his phone against the polished wood. Aunt Lydia and my cousins were scattered down the left side, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. They looked perfect. Darlene was wearing black cashmere and a string of pearls that I recognized as Margot's. Marshall was in a navy suit, his posture rigid and commanding. They had arranged themselves like a tableau of grieving dignity, a united front ready to accept their inheritance and manage the unfortunate problem of Ariana. They expected me to walk in alone. They expected me to slide into the chair nearest the door, head bowed, grateful for whatever scraps they decided to slide across the table. I did not walk in alone. I held the heavy oak door open and stepped aside to let Lena Mortimer pass. Lena was wearing a charcoal blazer that had seen better days and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone. She didn't look like the polished corporate sharks at Holloway and Crane, but she walked with a kinetic energy that made the air in the room shift. I followed her in. I was wearing the only suit I owned, a simple black jacket and trousers, but my spine was straight. I caught Darlene's eye. The panic was subtle, but it was there. It was a tightening of the corners of her mouth, a flicker of her gaze toward Marshall. "Ariana," Darlene said, her voice tight, "we didn't know you were bringing a guest." "This is my counsel, Lena Mortimer," I said calmly. "We are here for the reading." Marshall cleared his throat, a sound like a grinder stripping a gear. "Counsel? Is that really necessary? Ariana? We are all family here. Graham has been handling our affairs for 30 years. Bringing in an outsider feels aggressive. Standard procedure." "Mr. Griffin," Lena said. Her voice was raspy and cheerful, completely at odds with the funereal atmosphere. She pulled out a chair next to me and sat down, dropping a notepad onto the table with a loud slap. Especially given the complexity of the estate assets and the recent security issues. Evan flinched. He stopped tapping his phone. Before Marshall could respond, the side door opened and Graham Holloway entered. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of expensive soap. He carried a thick leather binder. "Good afternoon," Graham said. He didn't smile. He looked at Darlene, then at me, then at Lena. He nodded to Lena, a professional acknowledgement between sharks. "Ms. Mortimer, I received your filing regarding the inventory request this morning. We look forward to the response," Lena said pleasantly. Graham sat at the head of the table. He opened the binder. The sound of the leather creaking was the only noise in the room. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Margot Eliza Griffin," Graham announced. "Mrs. Griffin was explicit in her instructions regarding this meeting. She requested that the will be read in its entirety, without interruption. She also updated her will 6 months ago. The document I have here supersedes all previous versions." Darlene stiffened. 6 months ago? I wasn't aware of a revision. I have power of attorney. Your power of attorney ended at the moment of death. Mrs. Griffin, Graham said. His tone was mild but firm, and as Mrs. Griffin was of sound mind, She was entitled to revise her estate plan privately. He put on a pair of reading glasses. Shall we begin? He started to read. It wasn't just legal boilerplate. As Graham spoke, Margot's voice filled the room. The phrasing was hers, precise, unsentimental, and dangerously observant. It felt like she was standing in the corner, smoking one of her imaginary cigarettes, watching us squirm. I, Margot Eliza Griffin, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. She began with the small things. This was the disarming phase. To my daughter, Lydia, Graham read. I leave my collection of first edition novels and the antique vanity set she has always admired, in the hopes that she finds as much joy in reading stories as she does in telling them. Lydia flushed pink, unsure if she had just been complimented or insulted. To my grandson, Evan, Graham continued. I leave my father's gold pocket watch. It is a timekeeping device. Evan, I hope it helps you understand that time is the one resource you cannot borrow. Evan stared at the table, his face burning. To my daughter, Darlene, Graham read. Darlene sat up straighter, expecting the heavy hitter. I leave my diamond solitaire brooch and the contents of my jewelry safe, excluding the items specifically designated elsewhere. You have always valued the presentation of wealth. Darlene, wear them well. Darlene let out a breath she had been holding. She touched the pearls at her throat. It was a victory. She got the jewelry. The tension in her shoulders dropped 2 inches. She shot a quick, triumphant glance at Marshall. See? It is fine. She was just being grandmotherly. Graham turned the page. Now, regarding the residue of my estate, including the real property located at 44 Lindenmere Road, the contents of my investment portfolio held at North Pine Mutual, and my liquid cash reserves. The room seemed to lose oxygen. This was it, the millions. I have observed my family closely over the last decade, Graham read. I have watched how you treat those you perceive as weak. I have watched how you measure worth, and I have decided that the legacy of the Griffin family requires a correction. Darlene's hand froze on the pearls. Therefore, Graham said, his voice steady, I hereby transfer the title of the Lindenmere property and 80% of my remaining liquid assets into a newly created entity, the Lindenmere Trust. He paused. I name my granddaughter, Ariana Griffin, as the primary beneficiary of this trust. A sound came out of Darlene, a strangled gasp, like she had been punched in the gut. Marshall slammed his hand onto the table. That is impossible, Marshall shouted. Ariana is incompetent. She is bankrupt. She can't manage a trust. Please let me finish, Graham said, looking over his glasses with ice-cold authority. Ariana Griffin is also named as co-trustee, Graham continued, along with myself, Graham Halloway, to ensure proper administration. The trust provides Ariana with a monthly income for life, full residency rights at Lindenmere, and the authority to direct charitable giving. She will run it into the ground, Evan muttered, shaking his head. She doesn't know anything about money. The trust includes specific conditions for all other family beneficiaries, Graham said, raising his voice slightly to cut through the murmurs. Listen closely. He looked directly at Darlene. Any beneficiary named in this will who attempts to intimidate, harass, coerce, or legally encumber Ariana Griffin will immediately forfeit any and all distributions they are otherwise entitled to. This includes the no contest clause. Should any family member challenge the validity of this will, they will be automatically disinherited. We will contest it anyway, Marshall spat. She was manipulated. Ariana got into her head. Undue influence. I would advise against that, Graham said, because Mrs. Griffin anticipated a challenge. Attached to the will is a document titled Exhibit A, Evidence of Competency and Context. It contains 10 years of medical records proving her cognitive health, and a detailed log of her interactions with each of you. He turned the page again. Mrs. Griffin also included a section titled Accounting of Assistance. Darlene went very still. "I will read Mrs. Griffin's own words," Graham said. Quote, "For 7 years, my family has referred to Ariana as a charity case. They have used this label to justify their treatment of her. They claimed she was a burden. However, my records indicate that the flow of charity went in the opposite direction. Ariana gave her time, her care, and her silence. The family took her dignity, and in several specific instances, much more than that." I felt tears prick my eyes. I didn't wipe them away. I sat like a statue, letting the words wash over me. The flow of charity went in the opposite direction. "She calls us thieves?" Darlene whispered. Her face was a mask of shock and rage. "After I took care of her? I managed her doctors. I managed her house." "There is one final instruction," Graham said. He closed the binder and reached for a separate, sealed manila envelope sitting on the table. It had red wax on the seal. "Mrs. Griffin instructed me that if Ariana Griffin appeared at this reading with legal counsel, I was to read this statement out loud. If she came alone, I was to give it to her privately. Since Ms. Mortimer is present, I am compelled to read it to the room." My throat tightened. Margot had known. She knew they would try to isolate me. She knew that if I brought a lawyer, it meant I was ready to fight. And if I was ready to fight, I needed ammunition. Graham broke the seal. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Statement of Financial Irregularities." Graham read, "In 2019, I commissioned a private forensic audit of family accounts after noticing discrepancies in my own credit monitoring." Evan's face drained of color. He looked like he was going to vomit. He slumped back in his chair, trying to make himself invisible. "The audit revealed a pattern of identity misuse," Graham read. "Specifically, credit lines opened in the name of Ariana Griffin using the address of 44 Lindenmere Road. These accounts were used to fund lifestyle expenses for other family members." Darlene stood up. "Stop!" she screamed. "This is slander. She wrote this herself. Ariana wrote this." "Sit down, Mrs. Griffin," Graham said. His voice was like a whip crack. "This statement is notarized and accompanied by the original audit report from an external firm." He looked back at the paper. "The audit confirms that on July 14th, 2018, a credit line was opened with a co-applicant listed as Darlene Griffin. The funds were used for payments to a luxury car dealership and a plastic surgery clinic. The payments were defaulted on, resulting in damage to Ariana's credit score. Furthermore, on November 14th, 2017, a power of attorney document was executed allegedly by Ariana Griffin, authorizing the liquidation of her marital home equity. The signature on this document was flagged by the forensic analyst as highly likely forged." The room was spinning. I felt Lena's hand on my arm, grounding me. "She lists dates," Graham said, his eyes scanning the page. "March 12th, $2,000 for Evan Griffin, falsely claimed as rent assistance. September 20th, $5,000 for Marshall Griffin, falsely claimed as legal retainers." He lowered the paper. "The will states that the trust structure is designed specifically to protect the remaining assets from this type of predation." The silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and absolute. Then Darlene exploded. "You ungrateful little witch!" she shrieked, turning on me. Her face was twisted, ugly with hate. "You poisoned her. You sat by her deathbed and whispered lies to her. I am your mother. I did everything for you. You stole my identity." "Mom," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence, it carried, "You stole my credit. You stole the equity from my house, and you let me think I was the failure." "I was protecting the family," Darlene yelled. "We needed that money. Your father made bad investments. We were going to lose the house. You were losing yours anyway. Why shouldn't it help us? You didn't need it. You were alone." She stopped, realizing what she had said. She clapped a hand over her mouth. Lena Mortimer began writing furiously on her notepad. Marshall looked at Darlene with horror. "Darlene, shut up," he hissed. "No," I said. "Let her talk. It is the first honest thing she has said in years." "This meeting is becoming unproductive," Graham Halloway interjected smoothly. He looked at Darlene with open distaste. "Given the volatile nature of these revelations, and the incident reported to my office this morning regarding the removal of property from the Lindenmere estate." He paused, letting the weight of the missing box hang in the air. "Halloway and Crane will be petitioning the probate court tomorrow to appoint a neutral fiduciary to manage the estate during the transition to the trust. We cannot allow the current executor, you, Mrs. Griffin, to have access to the assets until these allegations of fraud are investigated." "You can't do that," Marshall said, his voice shaking. "We are the family." "You are beneficiaries under a cloud of suspicion," Graham corrected. "And frankly, given the admission Mrs. Griffin just made regarding the misuse of Ariana's funds, I would advise you to retain criminal defense counsel, not just probate lawyers." "Criminal?" Evan squeaked. "Identity theft and forgery are felonies. Evan," Lena said cheerfully, "and the statute of limitations hasn't run out on the 2018 incidents." Darlene collapsed into her chair. She looked small, shrunken. The pearls around her neck suddenly looked like a noose. "I think we are done here," Graham said. He closed the binder. "Ms. Mortimer, if you and your client would like to stay, we have paperwork to sign for the trust. The rest of you, please leave." It was a dismissal. It was an eviction. Marshall stood up, his face purple. He grabbed Darlene's arm and hauled her up. Evan scrambled for the door, not waiting for his parents. "This isn't over," Marshall snarled, looking at me. "You think you won? You have no one. You have cut yourself off from the only people who tolerate you." "I don't need to be tolerated anymore, Dad," I said. "I have the money, I have the house, and I have the truth." He pulled Darlene toward the door. As they passed me, Marshall leaned in, his breath hot and angry. "You are ruining everything," he hissed. "You are destroying this family." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had cornered me at the funeral, the man who had lectured me about standing on my own 2 feet while standing on my neck. "No," I said softly. "Grandma did. She just finally told the truth." He recoiled as if I had slapped him. He dragged Darlene out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. The silence returned to the conference room, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was clean. Graham Halloway let out a long sigh and took off his glasses. He looked at me, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a genuine smile, sad but approving. "She was very fond of you, Ariana," Graham said. "She was terrified she waited too long." "She was just in time," I whispered. "We have a lot of work to do," Lena said, tapping her pen. "But first, breathe," I nodded. I need a minute." "Take your time," Graham said. "I will have the paralegal bring the trust documents." I stood up and walked out of the conference room, down the long hallway to the elevator. I didn't want to break down in front of the lawyers. I needed to be alone. I took the elevator to the parking garage. The air was cold and smelled of concrete and exhaust. I found my sedan parked in the corner, far away from where the black Lexus had been. I got in. I locked the doors. I put my hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking. I thought about the pantry. I thought about the letters I never got. I thought about Darlene's face when she admitted she took the money because I was alone. They had punished me for being alone. And then they had stolen from me because I was alone. It was a perfect, closed loop of cruelty. But Margot had broken the loop. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me a shield. She had left me a weapon. She had stood up in that room, through the voice of a lawyer, and she had screamed the truth that I had been too weak to say for 7 years. The flow of charity went in the opposite direction. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. A sob ripped through me. It wasn't a pretty sound. It was a jagged, ugly sound that came from the bottom of my lungs. I cried for the 33-year-old woman who had eaten peanut butter for dinner so she could pay a credit card bill she didn't owe. I cried for the girl who had believed she was worthless. I cried because, for the first time in 7 years, someone had defended me. I wasn't crying because I had won. I was crying because the war was finally real. And I wasn't fighting it with my hands tied behind my back anymore. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but they were clear. I had a trust to manage. I had a house to reclaim. I had a lawyer waiting upstairs. I started the car, just to hear the engine run, then turned it off. I wasn't running away. Not today. I opened the door and stepped back out into the garage. I smoothed my jacket. I walked back toward the elevator. I had paperwork to sign. The weeks following the reading of the will were a blur of bureaucratic violence. The probate court, acting on the emergency petition Lena Mortimer had filed, appointed a neutral fiduciary to oversee the estate. His name was Marcus Vance, a forensic accountant with a personality like a freshly sharpened pencil. He did not care about family history. He did not care about tears. He cared only about numbers, and the numbers in the Griffin estate were screaming. The appointment of a neutral fiduciary changed the atmosphere instantly. For my family, accustomed to the soft power of guilt and the loud power of shouting, Mr. Vance was a nightmare. He froze the accounts. He changed the locks on the lake house again, this time installing a security system that required a biometric scan. He demanded receipts for every expenditure Darlene had made as executor in the days following Margot's death. The trust's enforcement mechanism kicked in with terrifying efficiency. When Marshall tried to call me 3 times in 1 hour to talk sense into me, Lena simply forwarded the call logs to Mr. Vance. The next day, Marshall received a formal notice that his potential distribution from the estate was being reduced by a penalty percentage for violation of the non-harassment clause. It was the first time in my life I had seen my father face a consequence he couldn't charm or bully his way out of. The silence that followed was deafening. But silence didn't mean they had stopped. It just meant they had gone underground. I was sitting in Lena's office on a rainy Tuesday when the forensic report on the break-in came back. Lena slid a folder across the desk. "The police didn't find fingerprints," she said. "The surfaces were wiped down, but Mr. Vance did some digging into the key logs. The side door of the lake house has an old tumbler system, but the alarm, which Darlene claimed was deactivated, had a passive logging feature." "And?" I asked. "The alarm was disarmed, using a code assigned to a guest user 4 years ago." Lena said, "But the physical entry was made using a key, a spare key. We found records in Margot's household files indicating a spare key was given to Darlene in 2019 for emergency access during a winter storm. She never returned it." I stared at the rain streaking the window. So she had the key the whole time. She waited until I found the box. Then she went in and took it. "It fits the timeline," Lena agreed. "Irene saw her car. The box is gone. And now Darlene is claiming the box never existed." I realized then that it wasn't just about the money. If Darlene just wanted the money, she would have tried to cut a deal earlier. She stole the box because she needed to control the story. The ledger in that box proved that the charity case narrative was a lie. It proved that while they were mocking me for being poor, they were the ones making me poor. Darlene couldn't survive without that narrative. If I wasn't the failure, then she wasn't the savior. She was just a thief. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email. The notification preview showed a burner address, similar to the one that had sent the photo of my house. I opened it. Subject: "Move on. Body. If you drop the trust thing and the investigation, we can all move on. The family has suffered enough. Don't be the reason we lose everything." A month ago, this message would have paralyzed me. I would have felt the crushing weight of responsibility. I would have worried about tearing the family apart. Now, I just felt tired. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it. I hit forward. I typed in Marcus Vance's email address and CC'd Lena. Message: "Another anonymous threat received at 2:14 p.m. Please log as evidence of harassment and potential witness tampering. Did you just forward that to Vance? Lena asked, seeing the small smile on my face. I am done managing secrets, I said. If they want to send threats, they can send them to the auditor. The final showdown was scheduled for Friday. It was billed as a distribution and inventory review, which was legal speak for the reckoning. We gathered again in the conference room at Holloway and Crane. The mood was toxic. The air felt thick, charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a tornado. Darlene, Marshall, and Evan were already there when I arrived. They looked haggard. Darlene's hair was pulled back severely, and she wasn't wearing the pearls this time. She looked stripped down, ready for a street fight. Marshall stared at the table, his jaw working. Evan looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Marcus Vance sat at the head of the table. Graham Holloway sat to his right. Lena and I took our seats on the opposite side. "Let us begin," Mr. Vance said. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We have completed the preliminary inventory of the estate. However, there are significant gaps. Specifically, the matter of the missing metal box from the Lindenmere pantry and the allegations of historic fraud raised by the late Mrs. Griffin's written statement." "The box is a fiction," Darlene said immediately. Her voice was raspy. "My mother was confused. Ariana is imagining things. The box is not the only issue," Vance said. He tapped a stack of papers. "We have subpoenaed bank records based on the account numbers listed in Mrs. Griffin's will. The banks have confirmed that transfers were made. However, without the original ledger or the underlying context, Darlene's counsel is arguing that these were gifts, that Margot gave this money willingly." "She did," Marshall said. "She helped us. That is what families do." "And the credit lines opened in Ariana's name?" Lena asked sharply. "Was that also what families do?" "There is no proof of that," Darlene shot back. "Margot's letter is just an old woman's ramblings. Where is the proof? Where are the documents?" She looked at me then, a look of pure, triumphant malice. She knew she had destroyed the box. She knew I had photos on my phone, but photos could be challenged. She thought she had won because she had erased the paper trail. The door to the conference room opened. We all turned. Irene Dalka walked in. She was wearing a heavy trench coat and carrying a small silver hard drive. She didn't look at the family. She looked straight at Marcus Vance. "Excuse me," Graham Holloway said, standing up. "Ms. Dalka, this is a closed meeting." "I am aware," Irene said, "but I am acting on the instructions of Margot Griffin." She walked to the table and placed the hard drive in front of Mr. Vance. "What is this?" Darlene demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "This," Irene said, turning to face my mother, "is the fail-safe." Irene looked at me, her eyes softening. Margot knew the pantry wasn't safe. Ariana. She knew that if Darlene ever found out about the box, it would disappear. So, she made copies, digital scans of every document, every bank statement, every page of the ledger. She gave me this drive 6 months ago with specific instructions. Release only if the box disappears. The color drained from Darlene's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair. "The family's attempt to destroy the evidence," Irene said calmly, "is exactly what triggered its release." Mr. Vance plugged the drive into his laptop. He clicked a few keys. The projector screen on the wall flickered to life. There, magnified in high definition, was the ledger. Date, July 14th, 2018. Amount, $4,000. Recipient, Plastic Surgery Center. Source, Ariana Griffin, credit line ending in 4490. Note, Darlene Cosmetic Procedure, claimed as Ariana Medical Debt to Family. Mr. Vance scrolled. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector fan. The documents showed a pattern that was even more insidious than I had realized. It wasn't just the big loans. It was a constant, parasitic draining of my identity. There were temporary store credit cards opened at department stores during the months of my divorce, maxed out on clothes and home goods, and then closed. leaving the inquiries on my report. There were utility bills for the rental house put in my name without my knowledge. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. They had used my credit score like a renewable resource, mining it until it collapsed, then blaming me for the rubble. "This is extensive, mister," Vance said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We are looking at over 40 instances of identity misuse over a 7-year period. The total value of funds misappropriated exceeds $80,000. He looked up at the family. "This is not just a probate issue. This is systematic fraud." "It was for the family!" Darlene shrieked. She couldn't hold it in anymore. She stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. "We needed it. Marshall lost his job in 2017. We were going to lose the lease on the house. We had to maintain appearances." "So you stole from your daughter?" Lena asked. "She would have failed anyway," Darlene yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Look at her. She was a mess. She couldn't handle her own life. We just utilized resources that were going to waste. She was the charity case. She was supposed to be the one who needed help. It didn't matter if her credit was ruined. She wasn't going to buy a house anyway." The confession hung in the air, ugly and raw. She would have failed anyway. That was it. That was the core of it. She didn't just think I was incompetent. She needed me to be incompetent so she could justify cannibalizing my life. "I didn't fail, Mom," I said. I didn't shout. I spoke with a quiet clarity that seemed to echo in the room. "I survived despite you standing on my neck." Darlene gasped. Realizing what she had admitted in front of a court-appointed fiduciary, she looked around the room, seeking an ally. She looked at Evan. "Evan, tell them," she pleaded. "Tell them we did it for all of us. You got the car repairs. You got the rent money." Evan looked at her. He looked at the screen, where his name was listed next to a withdrawal for ski trip. He looked at me. He started to cry. It wasn't a noble cry. It was the sobbing of a child who had been caught. "I didn't want to," Evan choked out. "She made me. She said if I didn't help her with the accounts, she would cut me off. She said Ariana was used to being broke, so it wouldn't hurt her." "You coward," Marshall hissed at his son. "Enough, mister," Vance said. He closed the laptop. The screen went dark, but the image of the ledger seemed burned into our retinas. "The evidence is conclusive," Vance said. "We have the digital trail. We have the admission of guilt from Mrs. Griffin. We have witness testimony regarding the theft of the physical evidence." He folded his hands. "Ariana," he said, turning to me, "as the primary beneficiary and co-trustee, you have a decision to make. The trust gives you considerable discretion in how to handle this." "What are the options?" I asked. "Option A," Vance said. "We file formal criminal complaints for identity theft, fraud, and grand larceny. Given the amounts and the duration, Darlene and likely Marshall would face significant prison time. Evan would likely be charged as an accessory." Darlene made a sound like a wounded animal. Marshall went gray. "Option B," Vance continued. "We settle civilly. The family agrees to a permanent, binding settlement. They will sign confessions of judgment. They will repay the estate for every stolen dollar, with interest, deducted from any inheritance they might have received. They will sign a restrictive order preventing them from ever contacting you or the trust again. If they violate it, the confessions of judgment are filed, and we proceed to prosecution immediately." The room waited. I looked at them. I looked at Darlene, who was trembling. Her arrogance finally stripped away to reveal the terrified, small woman underneath. I looked at Marshall, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked at Evan, who was burying his face in his hands. I felt rage. Yes, a hot, searing rage for the 7 years I had spent hating myself for their crimes. But beneath the rage, I felt grief. I grieved for the brother Evan could have been if he hadn't been raised to be a parasite. I grieved for the parents I wished I had. I grieved for the version of myself that had spent so long begging for crumbs of love from people who were busy stealing the bread. It would be easy to send them to prison. It would be satisfying, in a way, to watch the handcuffs click, to see Darlene in a jumpsuit. But that would mean a trial. It would mean years of testimony. It would mean keeping them in my life, bound to me by court dates and lawyers and hatred. I didn't want them in my life. I wanted them gone. I won't decide today, I said. The air shifted. What? Darlene whispered. I said I won't decide today, I repeated. I stood up. My legs were steady. You waited 7 years to tell me the truth. You can wait 1 weekend for my verdict. Ariana, please, Evan begged. Quiet, I said. The command was soft, but he snapped his mouth shut. I turned to Graham Halloway. You mentioned there was one more letter? A personal one? Yes, Graham said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't part of the legal binder. It was just a letter. She asked me to give this to you only after the truth came out. I took the letter. I didn't open it. I am going to go now, I said. I am going to go home to my house. I am going to read this letter, and on Monday, I will tell Mr. Vance what I want to do. Ariana, Darlene said. Her voice was unrecognizable, weak, pleading. We are family. I looked at her one last time. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and then consumed me. No, I said. We are just people who share a ledger, and your balance is due. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I walked down the hallway, past the reception desk, past the mahogany doors. I stepped out of the building into the late afternoon. The rain had stopped. The air was biting cold, the kind of Vermont cold that burns your lungs and wakes you up. The sun was setting, casting a bruised purple light over the town square. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat. I placed the unopened letter on the passenger seat next to me. I looked at it. For Ariana, I knew what I was going to do on Monday. I was going to choose option B. Not because they deserved mercy, they didn't, but because I deserved freedom. Sending them to prison would make me their jailer. I didn't want to be their jailer. I wanted to be a stranger. I would take the settlement. I would take the house. I would take the money they had tried to keep from me, and I would erase them from my life as completely as they had tried to erase my credit history. But that was a decision for Monday. Right now, I sat in the quiet car, my hand resting on the envelope. For 7 years, I had been the charity case. I had been the screw-up. I had been the girl who needed to be managed. Now the cage was open. The door was wide. I started the engine. I wasn't just driving home. I was driving toward a terrifying, beautiful blank slate. I had to figure out who Ariana Griffin was when she wasn't carrying the weight of her family's sins. I put the car in gear and drove out of the parking lot, leaving the Halloway and Crane building behind me in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was just a speck against the darkening sky. Thank you so much for listening to My Family Called Me the Charity Case for 7 years, until Grandma read her will out loud. I hope you enjoyed this journey of betrayal, justice, and reclamation. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments section. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Revenge Stories channel. We have many more tales of justice served cold coming your way. Share your thoughts on Ariana's decision. Would you have chosen prison or the settlement? Let's discuss it in the comments. Until next time, take care.